Our classes this week focused on power and politics in organizations. Power, as we discussed, is just part of the reality of organizations. People have differential levels of influence. It's something that is always of great interest when employees talk about their firms. They want to talk about who has influence, how they exercise influence. And it's important for leaders to understand the power dynamics that are taking place in organization, partly because you're going to be a part of it, partly because you're going to be somebody who is a target of it. You are going to be subject to people trying to get resource allocations from you, whether it's budget resources or raises. So you're inherently involved in a process of allocation that's in which you're going to make decisions, and people are interested in those decisions that you make, and you're exercising power. And then you're also going to have to engage the system of power, try and exercise influence as you yourself compete for access to resources. We have adopted the Cantor definition of power, which is this notion of the ability to get things done. And I find this really useful to think about power in this way because it also tells us why influence is associated with power. You know, people, if you're able to get things done, people want you to be involved with them. You start to have influence. You start to be invited to be a participant in decision making in organizations, which, as we talked about, the object of decision making is to do things, not just to make decisions. And so, this ability to get things done, while a little maybe broadly defined, really does, I think, capture the essence of what is power and how do you achieve power. You achieve power by being somebody who can get things done. Another thing that I think is important to understand is that while the getting things done in spite of opposition is sometimes the case, I think overwhelmingly the case is really you're dealing with indifference. People don't care about your problems. You have things that you want to resolve. You see opportunities for the organization. It's not that people are going to mobilize against you. They're just not going to care. And so your ability to get things done really is in the overcoming indifference and mobilizing people to engage is a key part of the exercise of power in organization. We said it's useful to and just start to understand the sources of power. And one source of power is the position you occupy, right? It's your position in the authority hierarchy. Positions usually come with resources in business. This is control of budget, information that's associated with your position, and that is formal power. You have resources to allocate. You have resources you're trying to gain. So that's where you're appealing to other powers. And then you typically have some information that's of value that people would like to have access, you're going to share, and it makes you a resource. The information that you have is an important part of getting things done in the organization. We said that, well, the formal authority structure captures one aspect of power. There is an interesting part of power, which is the informal authority structure. And the informal authority structure, informal power structure, is situations where people, no matter what their formal authority, they seem to have a capacity to work beyond their formal authority. And very often this is control of expertise, control of knowledge, information, makes you a valuable resource for making decisions, is a source of informal power. We also talked about, very importantly, that some of the informal power differentials are departmental differences that relate to the control of strategic contingencies. And the notion of strategic contingencies are the critical problems that matter strategically for the organization. And if you have expertise with respect to those, capacity to address those key strategic problems, you're going to very likely be invited to participate in decision making, critical decision making in the organization. And we see that different departments and different organizations have variable levels of power. In some organizations, it can be the finance function. Other organizations, it's the marketing function. A lot of high-tech firms, if you're not an engineer, you're not going to be a top-level participant in the organization. And those all reflect what are the key strategic challenges that the organization face and the expertise that needs to be assembled. And we see variance in departmental power as well as variance in individuals in formal power as well. In describing kind of what's going on within the organization, there's very much this notion of people seeking to advance their interests. In a garbage can sense, we might say advance their problems, get those gain participants to join in and be involved. And so a lot of what's going on in these systems is people are working to maintain a coalition. They're working to maintain and manage conflict where people have disagreements. And one of the key skills in navigating these situations is the capacity to negotiate, mediate disagreement, find joint win-win, we call them situations, integrative solutions, right, are all key kind of skill elements in navigating this environment where people do not necessarily agree, they're working at cross purposes. And the notion of this kind of political characterization, power characterization of the organization is to capture that reality. One of the things that we pointed out is because we have such a high value on kind of rationality and legitimate processes, that power, the exercise of power in organizations is often kind of beneath the surface. We may not even see it happening. And this is the notion that people who have power have a preference for trying to exercise it unobtrusively. So it's difficult to see. And generally what they're doing is they are using highly legitimate processes, but managing those processes in such a way that they get a desired outcome. So the notion of applying power to control the agenda, you can have an impact on the decision outcome. Hiring consultants, which is bringing in outside expertise, is a jealously guarded prerogative of people who have power, and that expertise allows them to kind of extend and influence decision process. Information control, alternatives that'll be voted on. All of these things, again, involve very legitimate processes that we accept as the correct way to do things. But what we don't often see is the way those processes can be influenced, and people use power to exercise that influence, and everything on the surface looks totally rational and how we would expect things to be. It's just good to understand that so you start to see it operating. And at some point, you may yourself want to get some things through. You're trying not to ruffle feathers. You are trying to exercise outcome control, and you use these techniques. We also talked a little bit about politics in organizations. We didn't go into it in a great deal of detail. You know, if we offer, and you have a chance to take an advanced leadership course focused on decision making, usually a big component of that will be politics and power in organizations. But for our purposes, I think it's important to understand that political activity tends to relate into instabilities in the basis of power. And we talked about these instabilities could be due to CEO turnover succession. They could be in the course of merger. It can very often create instabilities as people compete to establish a base of influence in the merged organization. Very often, also, what we'll see a big contributor to instability is when the strategic contingencies facing the firm are undergoing change. And these strategic contingencies can be suddenly information technology becomes extremely important to the success of the business, never mattered before. At that point, we expect information technology expertise to start having more influence and impact on the decision making in the organization. In terms of the kind of further readings that you might want to look at, Jeff Pfeffer's Managing with Power, Politics, and Influence in Organizations is a bestseller in this area. He's probably on about edition 8 on this. He's really considered one of the main people in research on power and leadership. He's a professor at Stanford University, and you had a chance to see a short video with him. And one of the things that I've always liked about him and about his work is he's he's very realistic, and he suggests you be realistic too. Power is going to matter, influence is going to matter, and if you don't want to participate in that, you at least need to understand it so you can avoid the landmines associated with it. The book Greed and Glory on Wall Street is about the fall of the House of Lehman, not in the post-mortgage crash, but the fall of the House of Lehman as a result of the power in politics, and we talked about this example in class. And then finally, Rosabeth Moth Kanter's book, The Change Masters. You had a chance to read a chapter from her book called Men and Women of the Corporation, which is an excellent book. But The Change Masters is about how change originates in the middle ranks in major corporations, and in particular, it's a lot of what she's documenting and arguing about or presenting is very much the garbage can model with the power and politics thrown in of how change happens in major corporations and the significant role that coalitions of the middle ranks play in forwarding change proposals and getting those adopted by big firms. She's looking at AT&T, IBM, Procter and Gamble, very large firms, and it's very interesting. I think informative and enlightening to see the opportunities associated with middle level management positions and the difference those can make, which ultimately making a difference in the context of those positions are tremendous career opportunities as well.